Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Pacific414 episode review. I'm your host, Mike. Today, in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the Netflix original series Transformers War for Cybertron trilogy that starts off with Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. Now, with this iteration of Transformers, it takes some elements of G1, little bit of the comics, not too much of the comics, but this is basically its own continuity, its own story about the battle between the Autobots and Decepticons. So, with that out of the way, and keep in mind, for any of you who do not like spoilers, well, too bad, because there will be some spoilers in this review. This whole series starts off just like G1 started off in the animated series in More Than Meets the Eye, with the first two Autobots that we met in More Than Meets the Eye, Wheeljack and Bumblebee. Although, in this iteration of Transformers, Bumblebee is not an Autobot in this series. At least not yet. Bumblebee is actually an Energon scavenger who Wheeljack hired to help them find some more Energon, with the Autobots low on their Energon energy source to power up their base and to keep themselves and their life force going. They need to find an Energon, and they need to find it now, especially with the war not going too well between the Autobots and Decepticons. So we see a few Terrajets fly over the area where Bumblebee and Wheeljack are searching. Bumblebee and Wheeljack are eventually discovered. We meet Megatron for the first time when the episode begins. We also meet Optimus Prime for the first time when this all starts. And much to this G1 fan's chagrin, neither character is voiced by their representative or their well known voice actors. In Megatron's case, Frank Welker, and in Optimus Prime's case, Peter Cullen. Neither one of them were asked, as far as I can tell, to come back for this series. It's two completely different voice actors providing the voice of Megatron and Optimus Prime. Of course, we have a few other familiar faces show up, especially on the Decepticon side when this first all starts out. We have Starscream, and the voice actor is trying to do his best impression of Chris Latta's Starscream. Chris Latta was the voice of the original Starscream in G1, and he was also the voice of Cobra Commander. And yes, I'll probably be doing different voices throughout this review. What? It's gonna be fun. Come on, just try to, have this be a fun review and give my overall thoughts and impressions on this particular iteration of Transformers. And this will be the first of three videos that I'll be doing for this series. The next one will be Earthrise, and then final will be For Kingdom. And I'll probably end up doing a live stream, just talking about all three of them and giving my full overall thoughts on all three of them, besides giving my overall thoughts on each chapter. But anyways, you know, Optimus and Megatron confront each other. They have a fight. Megatron reminds Optimus how weak he is, and Optimus does get hit several times. There's a scene where it was Chromia, who was a sniper, tried to kill Megatron during this fight, and she misses. Optimus and the gang have to retreat back to the base. This includes Bumblebee, even though Bumblebee isn't on the side of the Autobots just yet. I'm leaving it right there, just for now. Just yet. He's not part of the Autobots just yet, but he does retreat back to the Autobots base. Back at the Autobots base, we meet Cog, we see Ironhide, Hound, Prowl, and also Ultra Magnus. Ultra Magnus and Prime have a conversation about how the war is not going well for either side, and the possibility of surrender is high, and it's not so much suggested, but there's supposedly a peace offering on the table, a peace deal that Ultra Magnus does remind Optimus about and says maybe we should sign it. Optimus doesn't want to sign it. Optimus wants to find an alternative to ending the war instead of signing a peace accord, especially one that will probably be in favor of the Decepticons and Megatron in particular. So Optimus isn't going for that. But Ultra Magnus, on the other hand, ends up pulling out of the Autobot's base, and he eventually shows up at the Decepticons' base in their sector of Cybertron, and he and Megatron have a discussion. Of course, when you first see Ultra Magnus as he's approaching, and Megatron's giving this big speech to all his loyal Decepticons, reminiscent of Hitler and Nazi Germany, and it really evoked that kind of feeling where you have this dictator or tyrant in Megatron speaking to the masses, speaking to all the followers, and then you see Ultra Magnus show up wearing this cloak, and that was really reminiscent of Transformers: Dark of the Moon, the live action movie, where at one point in the movie, Megatron is actually wearing a tarp and it's cloaked around him because he suffered battle damage in the previous Transformers movie. But there's no need to talk about those movies, especially since their stories really don't make a whole lot of sense. They're just action-packed popcorn flicks. So, getting back to Ultra Magnus and Megatron, Ultra Magnus is trying to negotiate peace between the Autobots and Decepticons. He and Megatron have a conversation. Jetfire there, I was almost going to call him Skyfire, being from G1, but Jetfire's there, and that's another thing I'll get into here shortly. But Jetfire's there as one of Megatron's guard, and doesn't feel that Ultra Magnus can be trusted. Of course, Megatron wants to hear Ultra Magnus out, but he doesn't end up putting Ultra Magnus into a holding cell where even Jetfire says, "Are we sure we can trust him?" You know, Jetfire questions it. There's Shockwave, he's there, he questions it. Soundwave doesn't really say much, but Starscream, per usual, voices his objections and a few things that Jetfire says about what not wanting to destroy some of the Autobots, and this is not their way. This is not what they started the war for. Starscream starts questioning Jetfire's loyalty. Megatron and Shockwave have a discussion. Shockwave actually has a plan for ending the war quickly and decisively, and much in the favor of Megatron and the Decepticon cause. Megatron doesn't want to hear it, and while he's in the holding cell, Ultra Magnus sends a coded message to Optimus Prime, and that coded message is relaying to the plan that Shockwave has been trying to discuss with Megatron. What that plan is, and Megatron does eventually end up implementing that plan, at least giving it a go, is a plan of finding the Allspark. And once they find the Allspark, using it to reform all the Autobots into Decepticons and basically commit a genocide and give Megatron a clear and decisive victory over the Autobots. Well, Optimus gets Ultra Magnus's transmission about this plot that's being devised by Megatron, and then he gets a second transmission from Ultra Magnus saying that there's a location of the Allspark. The Allspark has been found, and Megatron is on his way to find the Allspark. and Prime takes a few Autobots with him to find the Allspark. And of course, later on, we find out that that second transmission was a facsimile of Ultra Magnus. It's his first transmission that Megatron had Soundwave manipulate so Prime and the others would be led into a trap. While they're led to this sector where this transmission was relayed, there's also mention from earlier in the episode where a space bridge is found, and the space bridge, keep in mind, that's going to play a key point in this first part of the series. I'll get to it shortly. But what ends up happening is Optimus and his group end up going to the area where the Allspark is supposedly at. Well, there are some Decepticons, Barricade, and Impactor, and a few others who are there, and they're ready to ambush the Autobots. The Autobots, unfortunately, have to retreat. Impactor is believed to be dead, and it leads back to the Autobot base where Elita 1, and Elita 1 is very good in this series. Very, you know, very strong militarily speaking, and she's not the only one. Ultra Magnus has his 2 cents. Hound throws in his 2 cents in this series, but they talk about how they can't afford to be going on these missions, especially if they're going to be ambushed like that, being so low on energon that they need energon. The Ark needs a lot of energon in order to leave Cybertron's gravity and go into deep space. And they don't have enough energon to even do that. They barely have enough energon to keep it cloaked and holograms up and running so the Decepticons don't find them. So what ends up happening is Ultra Magnus lets Megatron know about the Alpha Tram protocols, which are these secret protocols that are a secondary action, a fallback point for the Autobots in case something were to happen. It's to preserve all of the Autobots' history and culture and their knowledge. And of course, Megatron wants it for himself. So Ultra Magnus ends up leading Megatron to Alphatron's old base. Alphatron in G1 created Optimus Prime and also Elita 1. Again, it's not really hinted at that in this series because this is a completely different continuity, but it is still hinted how important Alphatron is to both Optimus Prime, Ultra Magnus, and the rest of the Autobots. So, Ultra Magnus ends up leading Megatron and his forces, which includes Starscream, to Alphatron's former base. They get into the former base, and Megatron realizes it was a ruse set up by Ultra Magnus. At, at that point, Megatron wants Ultra Magnus executed, and Ultra Magnus is executed. Of course, Jetfire protests. Starscream calls him a traitor, and Megatron even questions his loyalty. And at that point, Jetfire ends up retreating, leaving the Decepticon ranks, and starts heading toward the Autobots. And Starscream has been given command of the Seekers. And what's pretty cool, and I didn't mention it when I first started off the review, the Seekers, Starscream, Skywarp, Thundercracker, and I'll get to Skywarp here in a minute, is they're in their Terrajet forms that they were in G1, and I've seen that Hasbro has released a few, molds of Starscream, Skywarp, and Thundercracker in those alt forms. So, I think that's pretty cool about, little tidbits to throw in there to pay homage to what came before. But anyways, the whole reason why Starscream has such a grudge at this point against Skyfire or Jetfire, again, I'll probably be calling him Skyfire every now and then, is because Jetfire prevented Skywarp from killing an Autobot. And because of that, Jetfire ends up getting punched by Skywarp, and Skywarp threatens to tell not only Starscream but Megatron. Jetfire shoots him in the back. Skywarp is able to get away and fly back to the Decepticon stronghold, which he then proceeds to tell Starscream that Jetfire has betrayed him. So, that pretty much leads up to Jetfire escaping Starscream, Starscream calling him a traitor and going in pursuit of him. Jetfire eventually ends up at Autobot headquarters, the Ark, and pleads his case, says, I want to switch sides. Megatron is up to this plan. He wants to locate the Allspark. He wants to reformat the Autobots, and we need help. Now, what is also going on, even before this, is we end up meeting Ratchet for the first time. Ratchet is not part of the Autobots at this time, much like Bumblebee. Even though Ratchet does have an Autobot symbol on his chest, he is still a medic, but he's also, trying to attend to the wounded on both sides. He's not picking one side over the other. He's trying to help out both sides, and he wants no part of the war. And of course, when Wheeljack brings Prime and Elita 1 to Ratchet's area where he's tending to wounded Autobots and Decepticons, Ratchet's not too happy about Wheeljack bringing Prime to the area because he told Wheeljack to never let anyone know about this area, and if he ever saw him there, he would take care of him. So Wheeljack has Ratchet hear out Prime's case. Prime mentions the space bridge, and Wheeljack says, I need your help repairing that space bridge so we can get off world. So that ends up happening. Ratchet does end up agreeing. He ends up getting help from the Decepticon Impactor, who ambushed Prime in those false coordinates for the Allspark. And Impactor was left behind by the Decepticons because the Decepticons thought that he was dead. So it catches up to this point where Impactor, Ratchet, along with Mirage and Sideswipe have to go to Sector 7 of Cybertron, where the space bridge is, and get it repaired. What ends up happening, with the Autobots getting the information, going toward that space bridge, is they still need to retrieve enough energon so the Ark can be flight worthy. So Bumblebee says he knows of a guy who has a stockhold of energon and his basically at his will, and Bumblebee ends up taking RC and Cog there. And it comes to find out that this particular mercenary who has this stockpile of energon is Sound Blaster. Now, for anyone familiar with the Japanese fourth season of Generation 1 Transformers, Sound Blaster was the rebuilt form of Soundwave. But in this continuity, again, I'm going to say once again, and it's a separate continuity, Sound Blaster was an experiment of Shockwave, and one of the things that Bumblebee mentions to RC and Cog is don't tell him how much he looks like Soundwave. He hates that. So Bumblebee, RC, and Cog end up cutting a deal with Sound Blaster with their last supply of Energon. They offer these last canisters of Energon to Sound Blaster, and just when you think that they're gonna give it up when they get to the storage area, nope. Cog transforms, gets right on RC's shoulders. She blasts a few of Sound Blaster's mercenaries. They proceed to try to escape. Of course, Sound Blaster shows up and says, "You didn't think that I didn't have eyes and ears in the sky just like Soundwave, did you?" Basically, even letting them know, yes, I'm an exact clone of Soundwave, and just like Soundwave, I have my own cassettes because we see Sound Blaster's version of Buzzsaw and Laserbeak. So, what also has ended up happening is when Ultra Magnus is killed, Ultra Magnus had the knowledge stored within him, the Alpha Tram protocols stored within him, and they ended up transferring to Bumblebee. So Bumblebee knows about the Alpha Tram protocols, and that's what helps lead him to the knowledge of everything in Autobot history, and he feels that he can help the Autobots. So that's why he's there with the Autobots and RC and Cog in particular in this part of the mission. But unbeknownst to them is with Megatron being dissatisfied with Jetfire betraying them and losing Skywarp, and of course the death of Ultra Magnus, he decides that he'll go with Shockwave's plan of reformatting Cybertron by implanting a virus into the corpse of Ultra Magnus. It ends up going throughout the entire Autobot network, Autobot power systems, and it completely wipes out all knowledge that's on all stored databases in different branches, different bases, and unfortunately, it gets rid of the Alpha Tram protocols. Bumblebee, back at Sound Blaster's stronghold, ends up shutting down. RC and Cog have to escape quickly. And of course, this also leads to Optimus Prime and a group of Autobots having to locate the Allspark. They have to go to the Sea of Rust to locate the Allspark. They eventually do end up finding the Allspark and recovering it after dealing with not only some storms and lightning, but also zombie bots in the Sea of Rust. So the Allspark is recovered. Bumblebee, RC, and Cog return to the Ark with the Energon. Bumblebee's still out, and the Autobots are trying to get the Ark ready for liftoff as Ratchet and Impactor, along with Sideswipe and Mirage, are also trying to avoid being discovered by the Decepticons. And Mirage even uses the last bit of power he has to try to shield him, which doesn't last for very long because eventually the Decepticons learn of it, and Prime and the others end up going to Sector 7 where the space bridge is. There's a fight that ensues between Megatron and Optimus. It's not a one shell stand, one shell fall type of deal. It's who can gain the power of the Allspark. And there was even a point in the episode where Optimus even reaches out to the Guardian robots, and the Guardians were introduced in the episode War Dawn, and that was back in season 2 of Generation 1. Well, one of the Guardians turns out to be Omega Supreme. After the Guardians turn down Optimus Prime, Omega Supreme shows up near the space bridge. He takes out a few Decepticons. He even tells Megatron that he's doing this to protect Cybertron because the Guardian robots refuse to pick sides, except for Omega Supreme. Omega Supreme, he's his own bot. So he does what's best for Cybertron. And then what ends up happening is Optimus ends up tossing the Allspark into the fully activated space bridge. And of course, before it's even activated, Impactor is killed trying to protect Ratchet as Ratchet is going for the control console to activate the space bridge. With the space bridge fully activated, the Ark is eventually fully activated and on its way to Sector 7. The Autobots end up having a victory of sorts where the Autobots on the Ark are able to escape, and those Autobots are led by Optimus Prime. Meanwhile, Elita 1, Red Alert, and Jetfire are left behind on Cybertron, where Megatron still stands after the space bridge is completely closed. And that's another thing about the series. You saw appearances by Red Alert. They actually had some speaking lines. There's Ironhide, and I've already mentioned Prowl and Hound, but also having Omega Supreme show up. You had all three Seekers, Skywarp, Thundercracker, and Starscream, and a few others, Sunstorm and Acid Storm. No Dirge or Ramjet or Thrust. But you got your main three Seekers. You have Megatron and Soundwave. So all in all, the characters that you do see, it's done very well. This is more adult friendly, especially with characters dying and characters losing limbs. Yes, these are robots, but still, you get the side of those who want total control of Cybertron, you get the side of those who want peace, and those who feel that neither side should be fighting. All in all, this first chapter for the War for Cybertron series is pretty damn good. If I don't mind saying it, it's pretty damn good. And I can't wait to give you guys my review for Transformers War for Cybertron Earthrise, which will be coming out here shortly, as I am doing these videos prior to the release of Kingdom, which I will, do my review for that, and then I will more than likely do a live stream talking about all three of them all at once and what I like about them, what I don't like about them. But for this, I'm just going to give you my overall first impressions of each chapter, and then I'll get into what I like and what I don't like in the live stream that I'm going to end up doing. So, all in all, this first chapter is very good. I like it very much. Some of the voice acting, it's okay, but I'll get into that in the live stream. And some of it's very good. But again, I'll get into that in the live stream. But all in all, if you're a Transformers fan and you want something that's, a little more adult, this series is pretty good. It starts off very well, and I do highly recommend it. So, that's going to be my review, my first impression, my reaction, so to speak, to Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. Thank you all very much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Share this video with your friends. Comment on this video. And, subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. So until next time, thank you all very, very much. Really appreciate it. And until I see you all later, take care.